Dustin, if our culture walked into an initial therapy session with you, what do you think it would say?
Good question. Probably something like, I'm here because I know something's really wrong, but I'm not sure what. To which I'd reply, well, how are you feeling? And its response would probably be something like, I'm fine. I'm just tired, overwhelmed, emotionally numb, avoidant, reactive, hyper independent, and utterly terrified of being wrong.
Holy shit. That person needs some serious therapy.
Welcome to the Slog Pod, where we're not about diagnosing individuals. We're trying to treat a society that looks a hell of a lot like a traumatized client.
We constantly talk about the importance of identifying the problem, but I think we sometimes forget that critical first step. So let's start here. Culture is made of people, patterns, narratives, beliefs, and right now, those things aren't exactly what I'd call healthy. And that's a problem.
You talk about first step. You have to say there's a problem.
Are we good at that?
I don't know. I don't think that we are. I think, as a matter of fact, at least American culture seems to be the first to deny or just say no. I mean, we've got an entire side of our culture right now that wants to go back to when something was greater or something. So I don't know that we're okay at saying that maybe things haven't been the best.
Yeah. The reason I ask you that is sometimes I feel like I miss that like a lot.
Yeah.
I just am not, it's not even on my radar as I'm going through my day to day. I'm not really thinking about, is what I'm doing harmful to me? Is it harmful to others? It's not on the front of my mind. But isn't that kind of what we're saying? It
Yeah.
needs to be,
Yeah.
at least more than
That seems that importance of identifying the problem. Absolutely. That's it. That's it. So what we're seeing, kind of classic therapeutic red flags, right? Denial, projection, rumination, rigid thinking, emotional numbing, and compulsive performance.
Yeah. I'm sure you've seen a lot of that over the years as you've done therapy.
Yeah.
Like examples of all of those things.
Absolutely.
Probably combinations of many of those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're a mess.
Yeah. I don't know about a mess. I don't know that I ever call a client
I know.
a mess.
That's
but,
judgy. I know.
But we got to say something's wrong. And those are some of the things that are wrong.
Yeah. What I've noticed is that it seems we've built a culture that celebrates burnout, avoids the nuance, and scapegoats everything that challenges our worldview. That is our cultural default. And if that were a person, I imagine that person would be in therapy like 3 times a week and still lying to their therapist.
Yeah.
About what's going on.
I think you're right. You talk about celebrating burnout. I think that's our culture. This is what we do. We run ourselves into the ground. Our organizations and our underlying beliefs of those organizations are to grab greatest utility out of your workers. So we celebrate it rather than the opposite. That nuance that you're talking about, avoiding nuance, there's no simple answers, but we tend to run to the simplest explanation for things. And then, of course, we scapegoat. So I think everything you said was spot on, right? So we're going to explore what happens when we use mental health tools like CBT, systems theory, narrative therapy to unpack what's actually going on here. We're going to treat our cultures and systems like we'd treat individuals. We need to identify the poor outcomes, recognize our behaviors, emotions, and beliefs or cognitions. And then can we start to understand how we may be causing poor outcomes to either ourselves or to others? The systems, families, communities, and even our nation. With that understanding, we can begin to create solutions. We can work towards healing, towards health.
And then as far as billing goes, what are we charging? Just kidding. So let's diagnose a few of our favorite collective coping mechanisms that we, the patient, always seem to do.
Sure. So first up, denial.
Yep.
Think about climate change, healthcare, inequality. You name the issue, we know something's wrong, but we're so stuck in denial, we can't even allow ourselves to seek or hear the contradictory evidence. We need to actually do something about it. We're literally rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic and calling it innovation.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. What are we doing? The ship is taking on water, sinking. We just hit a giant iceberg and we're up there moving chairs around. Like that's going to do anything. Do we need something else besides moving chairs around in this?
Denial, I think it's that first mechanism that people hit in individual therapy. And in this scenario, if we're talking Titanic, you need to lift your head up and go, oh shit, there's water coming in. Why are my feet wet? Maybe there's a better outcome to be had. Maybe we should be looking at these lifeboats rather than moving the chairs around. It's just a thought.
That would be, to me, a better innovation to work on than just moving the chairs around. Sure. Another one that I see all the time is projection. When we can't tolerate our own fear, our shame, insecurity, distrust, whatever it is, we may be projecting that on others. What we're doing is we're seeing in them what we can't or won't face in ourselves. It's like a form of emotional outsourcing. We're literally handing off the burden of our own inner distortions, our own crap, so we don't have to hold it.
The projection thing is a really interesting one because I've seen this in therapy all the time. And I think it's harder to identify when people are doing it. Generally, we all have distortions concerning trust, safety, having power or not having power, control, that sort of thing, or our own self-esteem. It's easy to say, I can't trust or have that underlying current of belief and put that onto somebody else and say, that's the world we're living in. But what you're doing is you're just throwing that on to somebody else, which is, it's interesting, right?
It is. And I've seen it so many times. Workplace, of course, I'm always going to go there. But think of that boss you've had that was like super insecure. And that insecurity found its way into how they talked to you or communicated with the team, the decisions they made, and it just snowballs from there. But it's obvious. It's obvious to everyone that this person's, whatever's going on in their head is affecting.
Yeah, they're throwing it out to everybody else.
That's projection.
Good example, right? Another one, dissociation. We binge, scroll, doom, repeat. We're self-medicating with distraction, avoidance, and escapism and calling it rest.
Yeah. Escapism and rest, I don't think those are the same thing. Escaping is like saying, I'm just going to unplug my brain from everything. So if I say, we all do it, right? You know what? I just need a minute. I need to be on my phone and I need to look at my social media stuff and just not really think about much. We're escaping, but are we really resting there? And I guess what I'd say is that even serving us well? Like to me, it just seems like the ultimate coping tool.
It is.
Escaping.
I always tell people in individual therapy that our first coping mechanism is often avoidance. And I think that kind of encompasses all of that. And we're doing it in realms we've never had available to humanity until now with technology.
We are. Another one I think of is hyper independence. We've created a culture of me, my title, my accomplishments, my opinions, my identity. We glorify doing everything or doing it all alone. And then we sit there and scratch our heads and wonder why we're anxious, isolated, and disconnected. Isn't that wild?
Yeah. I think we're at a time when the identity piece is very individual oriented, or it's so tightly connected to those social structures that there's no fluidity in there. There's no change. There's no moving amongst that. We're at an interesting time. I think another one is false narratives, like pushing through burnout equals resilience, or keep calm and carry on. We've all heard that. Those narratives are distortions connected to avoidance and unhealthy beliefs. They're magical thinking with that social media filter.
Yes. And we all do it. I do it all the time.
Yeah.
I was doing it just then when you were talking.
That time to check out my Instagram.
Well, let's get down to text. Here's where things get interesting, right? Let's apply the therapeutic lens, Mr. Therapist. Let's go there.
Okay. Culture, our patient, is engaging in distorted thinking. We only see things through the lens we've been conditioned to apply. We see others as the villain because, of course, we have to be the hero. We reject evidence that contradicts our belief. We literally avoid information unless it reinforces what we already believe. Think about that. And we double down on our false narratives and maladaptive behaviors that maintain our sense of identity. We'll do whatever it takes to reinforce our conditioning, cling to the connections to our social networks, and protect the image of ourselves as the hero of our own story.
So let's move into systems theory and how that comes into play. Systems theory, as I understand it, emphasizes that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Mm-hmm.
So we both influence and are influenced by our systems. That's our workplaces, families, communities, etc. I like to think of the system as being a machine. A machine is the sum of its many interconnected parts. Each piece either drives or jams up the others. Leadership, in this analogy, may be a miscalibrated gear. Media may be that overreactive or overactive alarm. And the rest of us, well, we're just the cogs, grinding harder and just trying to keep from breaking down completely. Dysfunction in one of those parts ripples through the whole. That's systems theory, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure we can see how just impactful that can be and how we have a really tough time right now as we even understanding that two-way street of both influence and being influenced by our systems, and understanding there are systems outside of our systems that have different perspectives, different views,
Yeah.
and that they may be able to add or make better our lives.
So the lifeboat versus the deck chairs.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And we start alienating that outside of our systems or the systems that we've known.
The familiar.
Absolutely. Just something different. And narrative therapy. Let's go there. That says you are not the problem. The story is. So what stories are we stuck in? Maybe it's time we ask if the cultural scripts we're following even make sense anymore.
Yeah, I love this. I love this analogy. I'm a very figurative thinker and I write like that. So in my writer's mind, I love anything that puts it in that framework of writing. And we've talked about this before. We've got the pen. Well, our story isn't carved into a stone tablet.
But people think it is.
They think we sure operate like it is, oftentimes. But we can change that story. We can write it.
You can change that identity.
All of it.
Yes.
Yeah, like I don't know why we don't remind ourselves of that more often.
Because we're not flexible.
Well, speaking of getting to that point, let's talk about remedy. If culture's our client, what's our treatment plan for culture?
First, admit we're either causing problems for ourselves or causing problems for others. We need to slog our way to seeing how we've been conditioned by our systems. We need to remind ourselves that we have the ability to recondition those same systems. And other systems may hold the solutions we're seeking. Can we prioritize self-awareness over performative outrage?
What do you mean?
Well, I think our natural response, just as in dissonance hits our belief systems, is that performative outrage. If we can prioritize getting to a point where we know we need to have that self-awareness, the ability to be able to get outside and see yourself, your beliefs, your cognitions, your thoughts, your decisions, rather than jumping just to that performative outrage, that we'll be better off.
By prioritizing self-awareness, we're being proactive.
Yes.
Versus jumping right to reactive way, the performative outrage stuff we're doing.
Bingo.
Okay, good. What about emotional literacy? We've talked about naming things. We need to learn to name and navigate what we feel, not just react or numb ourselves. Correct?
Absolutely. So I often start this with any client I have. When in doubt, we talk about emotions. You got to go there. That's the driver for cognition. It's what powers our belief. It powers that passion to hold on to it, and it really hones what that belief is. So I think, as you say, we need to learn to name it and navigate it. Absolutely. But we first have to even be able to name it. That's the starting point. And then we can start to navigate it. Then we can start asking the questions. Should we? Where did this come from? Why is it this way? Is there a different way to look at things? Yeah. That's where we got to go with it.
Yeah, I agree.
So kind of third, reauthor the narrative, right? Let go of grind worship, the hero complex, and inherited beliefs that aren't serving us.
Yeah, and that's a tough one for me. Because in my mind, I'm a superhero.
You're a superhero anyway,
Oh,
buddy.
thanks, buddy. That is a tough one.
Yeah.
Lastly, what I'd add is we need to build spaces for honest community.
Mhm.
This is the authenticity part. We need to build spaces where we can bring our full selves, not just the curated brand or the image we're selling, but our full selves, the part of us that can see others, hear others, and ultimately change.
Again, bingo. That's where it starts. You said authenticity, genuineness. We need to be open enough to bring our full selves, and that we're not this curated brand. We're not trying to sell an image, and that image can change. That identity that we're constantly making can change. We need to hear others. You said not just see others, hear others, internalize it, and be able to, given that information, change. We are in systems. There are other systems beyond our systems. Those systems interact. We need to be able to navigate that.
And isn't that why we talk about empathy a lot? Isn't that what makes a sociopath a sociopath? Because they lack empathy.
Yes.
So they're not hearing, they're not putting themselves in another person's shoes.
Yes.
They can't get on other people's level enough to have any kind of.
As we discussed the slog, isn't that what we're talking about? You need to want, you need to get through that, to get into that, to even hear someone. You need to want to do that. That seems fundamental to me. We are in these systems, whether you like it or not. Therefore, dive in, fight, get in there, but you have to want to, and you have to want to be open to change. The whole point of this is being open to change. That is the slog.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're fighting for all the time. I know it's tough. I know we're going to have performative outrage right away. We're going to reject others. We are just offhand going to reject. The slog is to not offhand reject. The slog is to have self-awareness or try to prioritize that. The slog is to walk through this. Not easy. I don't think we're saying it's easy. We're saying it's difficult. We know it's difficult. We have a culture that is hurting. We need to do something about it. We're identifying that there's a problem. Can we get everyone to identify that there's a problem? Can we get everybody to say something's really wrong with our culture? Can we do that?
We're probably going to need a few more sessions with our patient right now, but I think we're off to a good start.
So culture doesn't need more advice. It needs reflection. It needs a mirror.
Yes. And that's literally what we're trying to be here. We're not experts. We're not gurus. We're just two normal dudes holding up a flashlight and saying, are you seeing this too?
So if any of this hits home, great. Sit with it. Don't fix it right away. Just feel it. That's the start.
And now you're in the slog.
See you in the mirror. Thanks for listening. Cheers.
Cheers.